What I've been reading is Ben Shapiro's book, The Right Side of History. I finished that a couple weeks ago now. And for those of you that don't know, Ben Shapiro is a conservative. He is a pious person. He's religious. He was an attorney that went to Harvard Law. He is a political commentator and has a YouTube show called The Ben Shapiro Show. There's a bunch of clips online. Now, Shapiro's definitely a conservative guy. He's Jewish, practices, and I apologize in advance for my ignorance, but that thing where Jewish folks can't use electricity or like take elevators or anything on Sunday, I believe it's the Sabbath, but I'm not 100% sure if that's like a holiday out of the year or if that's what it's called when they adhere to that practice every Sunday. But anyway, I just say that to say that, he's not typically the type of person or personality that I lean towards, although I do enjoy listening to his show when I do. I've heard him on podcasts in the past. I like his point of view on things, not on everything, obviously. But I do definitely think it's important to listen to, quote, the other side. When you feel that you believe one thing, it makes sense to me to factor in the viewpoints and ideas of the opposite or an alternative viewpoint to your own. You might learn something new. I also believe it improves critical thinking. It opens up pathways in terms of patterns in the way that you think, perhaps. I know it has for me. And I think, generally speaking, it's more wise to know and understand other viewpoints than your own to truly be able to reevaluate your own ideas and takes on a situation and also see if your ideas hold water. Instead of just thinking, no, I'm right because this is what I've always thought. And a funny point about Ben is that even though he is a Jewish conservative person and he has gotten berated for being so, he has also been called a right-wing Nazi. So it's like you can't win with folks, right? And again, it goes back to what I was speaking about before at the head of the show, where sometimes it has a lot to do with folks' interpretation of what it is that you put out there and not necessarily the intent behind what it is that you put out there. Now, one of my favorite things about the book and biggest takeaways is that Ben takes a deep dive into showing how we got to where we're at today politically by going back and revisiting, really laying out in a comprehensive way how the religion and philosophy and ideals and concepts of folks like Voltaire and Socrates and Descartes and Machiavelli and others borrowed from each other and each other's concepts. They built upon them and evolved their own ideas. And he really showed how they are all connected, how they all overlap and inform each other. And I remember while listening to the audiobook, I made a mental note of this is definitely something that I want to revisit because it's such a bird's eye view that it's worth the second listen and maybe even the third, who knows, just so I can grasp more of it the second go around. And the other thing that I want to share with you guys, the other takeaway from this book is how he ended it with what I thought was a thoughtful story about his daughter asking about his mortality and if he's going to be around when she's older, etc. So this is a bit of a spoiler alert because I'm going to share a small clip. So in case you want to save that for when you actually read the book, feel free to skip ahead about a minute and a half or two.
I don't tend to be much of an emotional creature, but having kids changes that. One evening, recently at bedtime, my daughter turned to me and asked, "Daddy, will you always be my daddy?" Surprised, I answered, "Of course, sweetheart." But, she clarified, "One day I'll be older, and really old people die. So will you still be there?" I felt a catch in my throat because, naturally, she's right. I don't like to think about death with regard to my own parents, let alone with respect to my children. And while I'm a believer in the afterlife, there's no real way to know. I don't know what comes after this. Nobody does. I put my hand to her hair and stroked her head. "Yes, baby," I answered. Mommy and I will always be there. We'll always be your mommy and daddy. I turned out the light and left the room. Then I sat outside her door and thought about how much I loved her and how one day she'd face all the tough questions we all face. And I thought about how I would answer those tough questions for myself. In the end, are we all orphans? Are we bound to lose all those we love and live and die alone? Are we specks, blinking in and out of existence, leaving no trace? I don't think we are. I think that the history of Western civilization shows that our parents live on in us, that when we accept our past, when we learn the lessons they teach us, when we recognize their wisdom, even as we develop our own, we become a link in the chain of history. Our parents never die so long as we keep the flame of their ideals alive and pass that flame along to our children. After I knew my daughter was asleep, I sneaked back into her room and kissed her head again. She was asleep. I know she probably didn't feel it, but maybe she did. And that maybe is all we can hope for, all we can strive for. It is our job to carry on the tradition. It is our job to push the task forward. If we do, then we will be truly deserving of God's blessing and fit to proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. We will choose life so that we and our children may live.
I thought that was a pretty dope story and sentiment for him to share in the book. So I wanted to share it with you folks. And again, that is The Right Side of History by Ben Shapiro. I will link to it in the episode notes, along with Ben's YouTube show, The Ben Shapiro Show.